Transition to electric vehicles hit a bit of a speed bump due to lower customer demand.
People have big questions, and tonight there's some clarity in a new study comparing the costs of fueling an internal combustion engine and charging an electric vehicle.
Will EV eventually fall out from the grid? Recently, there was a scandal about electric vehicles being a scam. Despite some misleading headlines, the owner reveals why they were excited to share their experience. It says that America's push for electric vehicles was silly, but what he actually said was that not paying attention to hybrids was silly. Hybrids are a great option to get lots of people driving efficient cars fast. But some companies like GM chose to skip hybrids and focus on electric cars instead. Then they changed their minds when electric car sales slowed down. The fast move to switch to electric cars as the main way to get around in America is slowing down, according to one car expert and enthusiast, and they predict that hybrid cars will be the future. Many do think hybrids are a great choice, especially for people who are unsure about electric cars. This isn't a new or controversial idea. David Tracy, the EV owner, said he supports electric cars, but he also loves traditional gasoline cars and was honest about the good and bad parts of owning an electric car. There's nothing quite like shifting gears in my Jeep Wrangler and hearing that 4-liter engine roar. Tracy mentioned that whether an electric car is practical depends on a person's situation, the type of driving they do, and where they live. He thinks it'll take a while before the US is ready to fully switch to electric cars, especially because one of the main challenges is having enough charging stations. For people who can't charge their electric cars at home, for instance, he suggested that hybrids are a better option. Tracy thinks ultimately the push is to reduce CO2 emissions, so some automakers are focusing on hybrids. Some automakers are focusing on electric cars. The overall goal, though, is to reduce emissions through whatever means necessary. The interest in electric cars is still there. It's still growing, but it's not growing as fast as it did before, and that indicates that people want hybrids. What are the advantages of owning an electric car according to Tracy? They're great on maintenance, they're fun to drive, they're cheap, and you can get them cheaply because of federal rebates. If you have a place to charge, they're fantastic. Now, some of the downsides, of course, the infrastructure isn't perfect, and especially if you don't own a Tesla, there's some planning that you're going to have to factor into any trip. If you want to buy a new one, even with rebates, they're a little bit pricier, but they're basically getting there in terms of cost parity. Tracy mentioned that it's important for people to consider factors like the EV infrastructure in their area and the type of driving they do before buying an EV. However, he believes that an EV is a great choice for people who just commute to and from work every day. The public charging experience should really be split into two groups, Tesla and non-Tesla, since Tesla's experience is generally smoother thanks to their supercharger infrastructure. You never have to do an oil change, and you hardly ever need to replace the brakes because it uses the motor to slow down instead of the brake pads. There are some difficulties, but there are also some great benefits. You won't have to deal with things like the transmission failing or camshaft position sensors failing. It's just much simpler to maintain. You may find that more cars at the dealership will become electrified. You might have to choose a hybrid, which you will like. If you're switching from a gas car to a hybrid, especially if it's an automatic transmission, they're great cars these days. So it's not really going to feel like a hit as long as there's a hybrid option. In this video, you'll see Tracy frustrated because 3 Electrify America charging stations are broken just when my 2011 Nissan Leaf, a car he bought for only $2,000, will end up costing him $1,000. This might not be a shock to those who follow regularly. Before that, the car's battery is degraded to about 40% capacity, meaning it can only power the car for around 20 miles on flat ground. The video ends with him saying he might have to leave the almost dead Leaf in that parking lot and take an Uber to my destination, though he actually found a level 2 charger nearby and later drove the Leaf home. He mentions in the video's caption that America's charging infrastructure still needs work. It's okay to be skeptical about electric vehicles. This was enough for anti-EV extremists to get excited and used his clip to push an anti-EV agenda. It's okay if you don't like how the government is pushing EVs on everyone, and it's even okay to dislike EVs themselves if people just did those two things. He says he wouldn't use the term extremist. It's totally okay to be skeptical about EVs because of relatively long charge times, significant infrastructure issues, high average EV costs, concerns about battery degradation, range anxiety, worries about mining materials for batteries, road/bridge concerns related to the high weight of EVs, fears about how violently EVs can burn in a crash, and so on. But people in the comments of David Tracy's Instagram reels were not just expressing their dissatisfaction with America's EV push, EVs themselves, or any of the other issues he mentioned. Instead, they went too far, calling him a sheep, often mentioning virtue signaling, implying he fell for some kind of government trickery, and they are bullying him. It was pretty harsh. America is deeply split over electric cars. What does bullying and misogyny tell us about the state of Americans' EV transition? They dislike EVs so much that anyone who drives one is seen as different, almost like an enemy. They even see those drivers as less manly. There is a lot of skepticism about whether EVs are really better for the environment than gas cars. For example, one even went ahead to say that electric vehicles should not exist. Their footprint on our planet is so much more toxic than fossil fuels. This claim about EVs producing more carbon over their lifetime is mostly inaccurate for new cars. Many believe that electric vehicles are a tool the government will use to limit their freedom to move. Electric vehicles may be gaining attention, but they are not as popular as some might think. In fact, 44% of Americans would rather pay $10 a gallon for gas than drive an electric car. This sentiment is strong, as some people express they'd rather walk to the grocery store than pay such high gas prices. The idea behind electric vehicles is that they are better for the environment and help reduce greenhouse gases. However, some people worry this might not be true. Making an EV creates more emissions than making a gas-powered car. Even though EVs don't have tailpipe emissions, people are concerned about what will happen to all the lithium-ion batteries in the future. The long-term effects of EVs on the environment haven't been fully studied yet, so they might only be a short-term fix for a long-term problem. President Joe Biden fully supports electric cars, while former President Donald Trump is against them. Electric cars have become a symbol of political views. Some people, like the writer, don't want their car to show their political stance. They think that trying to guess people's politics based on their cars is not a good use of time. As of March 2024, there were only 42 electric models available on the market, while more options are expected later this year. The current selection is limited. If you need a pickup truck or SUV, your choices are very few, unless you're willing to spend a lot of money on a Cybertruck, which may or may not be reliable. Did you know that home chargers cost extra? Add another $1,000 to that $67,000 price tag. At the same time, you have to pay for a professional installation, which costs another $500 to $1,200. And this is if you own a home. If you live in an apartment, you can't have a home charger and must rely on public charging stations, which still need improvement. Do you know how iPhones quickly lose their value because technology changes so fast? Every year, new software and hardware make last year's model less appealing. The same thing happens with EV technology. EVs lose value almost twice as fast as gas-powered cars because their technology is so new. Automakers are still figuring things out, and while these early models might have problems, they will improve over time. The average range for a new EV is 250 miles, while a full gas tank gets you 400 miles. This means you'll need to refuel twice as often with an electric car. With few charging stations around, this can make people anxious. If you run out of battery on the highway, you'll have to call AAA for a tow, which can be stressful and costly. There are over 150,000 gas stations across the United States, but only 50,000 charging stations. This means there aren't enough places to charge an electric car. Without enough charging stations, you might constantly worry about running out of battery while on the road. So, are you an EV fan or fuel-powered cars? Do let us know in the comments below. Also, don't forget to hit the like and subscribe button. Until next time, see you all.